Hi, and welcome to the Thriving Entrepreneurs live 15-minute broadcast on LinkedIn. She's Rochelle Learling, entrepreneur coach.
He's David Foster, founder coach.
And today we're barreling straight into the expertise of Rochelle. We wonder a lot, actually.
Right.
But we're wondering, is your spouse also an entrepreneur? And if not, what's the communication like between you when it comes to business and the expectations of that business as it affects your lives? What's worked and what hasn't? And so today we're asking, how can a spouse understand your life as an entrepreneur? And we're going to start with Rochelle. She's going to talk for 14 minutes, and then that will be it.
And then you just say amen, and then we go.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I know you're also experienced in this field, so we got something to talk about here. But yeah, where to start? I think for just clarification, both of us have partners who are entrepreneurs as well. So they have the experience. They know what we're going through. So that makes things a bit different. But I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there who don't have an entrepreneurial partner. And that might really think that things get really complex there. And speaking from friends and speaking from clients, I think there's a lot to tell about here, that things can go really badly when you focus on the business so much that you forget about the partner. So I think it's really important that we bring it up today. And
yes. Because I think what we're really talking about is almost like the difference between the entrepreneur or founder world and the quote unquote regular job world, right? Like the expectations and the impact that those worlds have on your life and your collective life. I think those things are different.
Sure. I mean, an entrepreneurial life, as we know, is pretty much like intertwined with personal life. It is so personal. But I think that when we look at the role of a partner, it's so much more important than a partner who supports your career in general. Because in the end, as we've talked about in the early stages of this series as well, there's a lot at stake in terms of overwhelm, a lot of burnout, a lot of stress going on. And I think that the partner can be that rock that we all need when things go south, or when we need to be really honest about things not going well and that we need to make some changes. But that partner needs to be, first of all, willing to help, because I can imagine this is really challenging to really step up and add this dynamic to your relationship. And secondly, really understand what's going on.
And to be clear, since we had a bit of a struggle coming up with the right title, when we say partner, we're talking about life partner and not a partner in the business. Now, when you're talking about somebody being willing to help, I think the natural follow-on question is, how much are they willing to help? Right. And that speaks to being communicative when it's necessary and willing to be honest. And boy, those two things aren't the easiest things in the world. Right. And I think one thing that, at least for us, has made it easier, because, to be perfectly transparent, we have worked together in different businesses over the years, although we do not now. And we, even when we work together, we set aside time that is just for us to talk about what's going on. Not necessarily what's going on with the business, but maybe what's going on with us, definitely. And keeping that time sacred in a way, and knowing that you're going to have to say whatever it is that you have to say, and putting your limits up, boy, that makes a big difference.
Yeah. And I guess in our case, what we do is we have this golden rule that we don't talk about work after dinner. So again, we also work after dinner, but once it comes up, somebody just has like this brainstorm, like this idea, or just like talks randomly about a meeting we had. I'm like, no. So we correct each other. And I think that is important as well, that you really keep each other sharp on, hey, this is life and this is business. And know when it's over for the day, so that you really, I think, as we talked about before we started going live, that you have that on off, really on and off. And when we do cross the line and we're too on, that our partner also flags that and says, hey, I think you're too on. What can we do to, relax you, unwind you, to be present again. And for some people, actually, it helps to have this ritual, like almost after work ritual before they enter the house or before they come home to the spouse or the kids, so that they are like really there again. And I think that is pretty important, to have something that you know is going to help to get you back into being a person, a human being, an entrepreneur.
That's true. As if you weren't a person when you were an entrepreneur.
Right.
Johan says it's very different being an entrepreneur versus in corporate life. And if I may, I do know that you know that, Johan, and I'd be curious to see what the first thing that pops into your mind is being different. And, you know, when you're talking about Rochelle, when you're talking about the, call it ritual of coming back into the couple environment, you know, you're really talking about expectations and what are the other person's expectations and what of your expectations are of yourself. And I think that if you're the entrepreneur and your spouse isn't, you know what, it's your responsibility to explain what it's like for you and what you would benefit from and sort of like what you need. And like, look, whether you're talking about a romantic couple or a business couple or, you know, just a couple who's working on something, it's really hard to over communicate. Like say it if it needs to be said. And I think that's a good question for people to ask. Have I said what needs to be said?
Yeah, right. And thanks for this, Cole. I agree on this one. Yeah. And I think now we're looking from it from the entrepreneur's angle, right? Like this is what I would need to, you know, unwind. This is what I need in order for me to come home and feel like I'm a human being and not an entrepreneur for the moment. But we also need to look on the other side of the partner who's maybe not the entrepreneur. And for that person, it can be super stressful to know that much about the business, to know what's really going on. And they stress out even more than we do. And I know a lot of cases where people break up with the entrepreneur because it just cannot handle the stress they feel that is not even theirs, because they go to bed with it, because they feel it in the air, in the home. And that's just something really heavy to carry. So it's also a point where you have to both say like, hey, listen, this is too much for me. This is no longer a relationship. This is actually me being your therapist. And you also need to find a way to talk to somebody else who can be that objective partner, like a coach, who understands more than this than I do. But let me be that emotional support only, because there is a thin line in telling everything versus not telling a thing.
Yes. Because, and thank you for saying the coach part, so I didn't have to complete that thought for you, because I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to do it. But, you know, there's another part of what you're talking about when you overburden your spouse, and that is that you lose that piece of your life. And he or she also, you know, you lose that sense of being a couple.
Right.
And having that, as you described, and all I'm doing is agreeing with you, is, you know, having that outside perspective that's both supportive and hopefully experienced. Boy, that takes an awful lot of pressure off of your spouse. It takes a pressure off that relationship. Right.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, another question that you can ask yourself when you're talking to your spouse is, you know, do I need to explain all this in order to get some support? And if you do, boy, is that too much? Maybe it's not. You know, what works for two people, go ahead and do it, whatever it is, as long as you're not harming each other or other people. But you have to ask, is this, do I need to go through this huge explanation only to be able to like get his or her opinion?
Right. Or just to convey it and just have it out there and just, you know, feel like you breathe again after having it out of your head. But I also think, as you said, like ask the question to yourself, but also be there for the partner and say like, hey, am I stressing you out too much by giving all this info? If so, then I'll need to find another way. Because I think in the experiences that I've had with other people having like big issues in the business, they just don't seem to make a decision somehow. And then they keep on telling the partner about that decision that's still lingering on their mind. And it keeps them busy during the weekends or at night. And that just drags on and on and on. Well, it could have been solved earlier when there was an objective partner in there who, you know, like a coach who could have been like, hey, let's decide on this together so that the partner can breathe again. And, you know, that it is a thin line. It's hard to say who can handle, who can't, or what they can handle. super personal, but I think, as you say, over communication is key here.
Yeah. And, you're talking, you're really illustrating the difference between the risk tolerance
Right.
between the entrepreneur's life and the quote unquote regular corporate job.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're an entrepreneur and you think, well, geez, I don't know when my client's going to pay, to relay that to your spouse, you're really asking your spouse to incorporate a completely different risk tolerance, which might be fine if you talked about it. But if you didn't, think about how that thought could spiral out of control.
Right. Yeah. And thanks, Johan, for explaining what you meant with that and the difference between being an entrepreneur and having a corporate ambitious life. Yeah, of course, there's so much more at stake, harder to disconnect. It's part of us. Definitely agree with that.
Yeah. And fair point, Johan, thank you for that. And I think that if you overburden your spouse, you lose that support that he or she can give you when you disconnect.
Right.
Right. If you violate their boundaries in a way, how is that going to be enjoyable? I'm curious about Cole's comment. He said that hard stops, were a really positive shift. And I'm curious if those were unilateral on your part, Cole, or did you talk to your spouse about what was right and what was wrong? Right.
Yeah. Right. I'm also curious, like, if there are people listening who feel like they have gone too far in, sharing stressful situations and matters going on in the business, like what you would do to get out of it or to rearrange that with a partner.
We go back to the communication, but I think one thing that's important in the communication is to be clear about your own risk tolerance and what you've decided to do, because it is a different world. And to not be clear is to allow the other person's thoughts to really run wild. And that's not that kind in a way, right?
And that can also be stressful because if you don't know what's going on, you feel left out and you might even lose connection over that.
Yes. And because I'm known for annoying questions, I have to throw another one in. And that is, if you're the entrepreneur, your spouse has maybe a regular job or a different understanding of the world, you really have to ask yourself, how can I help you?
Yep.
How can I, like this isn't all about me. We're 50-50 in this. So if you're maybe worried about my business or my client or my future, or maybe you're jealous. I've certainly experienced that, right? When I've had big success, it was actually, the big success was less pleasant than struggling. So you go back to your spouse and try to figure out what he or she needs, because to provide that is, well, you're doing a good job at being that person's spouse.
Yeah. And I also think it's important to add that what really helped us, and again, we are both entrepreneurs and we work for the same business that we created, so it's different, but having like a life vision next to your business vision and creating that with your partner is super essential, I think, to really find out what's important for him or her and for you and where that aligns and what you guys need in order to thrive together, but also how to make sure that the business is still part of this and how you can actually support this. Plus, if the business goes up and you want to leave it, or you want to have a nice exit, like what would you do with that time? Would you be at home, or would you could you do something together? And I think having that almost milestone, that clarity on the future together with that partner, gives a lot of like peace in the home as well.
Yes, I agree. And in the last 20 seconds, I will add, it's a fair question to ask your spouse, is what I'm doing fit? Does what I'm doing fit with what we want to do? How does it fit? How does it not fit? Doesn't mean you have to change, but awareness gives you an awful lot of peace and also helps other people.
Yeah.
Cole's coming in with a last minute comment. Just me, but I recognize that my relationship with others could be better. Yeah, fair point, Cole. That's really great. And I think that might help an awful lot of people.
It starts with yourself. And I think, yeah, as a last point, make sure that you're aware of, your relationship with that partner and how what you're telling somebody affects your relationship.
Yes.
Once you become aware of that and you communicate about that, I think a lot will change already.
Agreed. Totally agreed. We are over time. No one has time for more than 15 minutes, if we've decided that. We do rebroadcast everything on our new podcast, which Rochelle made a post about today, and I will probably tomorrow. Yep. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Talk to you next week, Thursday. Bye-bye.